Hey everybody, this is Flavio Romeo, and on this episode of the Towncast, we had the opportunity of catching up with Bergen County resident Ben Purkert, who wrote his first book. It was just published in August of this year, and he shares his journey from growing up in Bergen County, going to school, writing his first poetry book, and then publishing his very first novel. And we're going to have a book signing on December 14th of this year from 5 to 7 at the Glen Rock Athletic Club in Glen Rock, New Jersey. Make sure you come out and support him. All right, enjoy the episode, everybody. All right, everybody. So this is really exciting. Listen, the holidays are coming up, and I know in the day of streaming videos and all that people like to sit at home and watch TV. But our next guest is it's a guy. He wrote his debut novel, his very first novel, called "The Men Can't Be Saved." It's Ben Purkert, and I have to tell you, or Purkert, and I have to tell you, some of the review. First of all, I didn't finish it. Full transparency, I didn't finish the book, but I'm halfway through it, and it is such a great read. It's such a fun read, and we're going to get into it. Some of the reviews I loved: a laugh out loud romp about masculinity, sex, and obsession, a cathartic workplace read, which doesn't necessarily mean read it in the workplace. This is great fun, and I love the one they called it "Day Beautiful." So let me welcome Ben Purkert. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, as I'm reading through it, I could see it as a movie, or at least like a mini series, almost like a Mad Men kind of a read. So, was this a little autobiographical in parts?
Yeah, well, you started with Mad Men. That's my favorite TV show of all time. I love that show.
One of the best.
And after watching the show, I was working at an agency myself. I was working as a copywriter, just like my main character. And my friends and I who worked at the agency, we would watch Mad Men, and we would talk about like how different it was, right? Because so many things back then weren't applicable to us, but even more so, how little had changed. We still have those, big egos, the big characters, the crazy workplace. So this book, in many ways, was my attempt to write sort of like a Mad Men for the contemporary moment and to look at what the agency landscape is like.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of scotch drinking at 9 a.m. Smoking in the office.
Different drugs at different times of day. It was, it sort of felt like the alcohol changed, but the intoxication part had not changed in some ways.
So let me go back. Let me go back to your background. I know you grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey.
Yeah, so that's right. My dad went to Bergen Catholic. I grew up in New Jersey and lived there my whole life and still live here.
Yeah, it's a great place. It's the Garden State.
It is the Garden State.
Some of the greatest people in the world came out of New Jersey.
But we're not biased. Not biased. But we're not biased. That's New Jersey.
No, completely not biased.
Yeah.
So what was your growing up? You went to Bergen Catholic. When you graduated, did you know what you wanted to do? Did you know what you wanted to be?
Yeah, and so my dad went to Bergen Catholic. I actually went to Newark Academy in Livingston, but spent a ton of time in Bergen County because my grandparents were there. First in Glen Rock and then in Ridgewood. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. My favorite teachers in middle school and high school were my English teachers, and I just wanted to spend more time with them. I don't even know if I loved books so much as I just loved the energy that they had. And it felt like you weren't going to talk to your math teacher about your relationships. You weren't going to talk to your science teacher about, difficult at home. But with your English teacher, you kind of, because that's so much of what you were reading was about family and love and loss and all these things. So English class was always just a very comfortable place for me.
Was there any particular English teacher that you could shout out and say thank you?
Of course, yeah. Betsy Lapadula. Amazing English teacher. She still teaches in New Jersey. And, we stayed in touch to this day because I think as an English teacher, you kind of want your students not necessarily to grow up to become writers, but to have books in their life and to, stay lifelong readers. So my relationship with her has been a huge impact. And in the book, I acknowledge her and some of the other teachers that I had growing up in New Jersey.
Yeah. So when did you get to the point where it's like, I want to do this, whatever I do, when I graduate, I want to go somewhere when I can do this.
So, you and I were talking a little bit before. I studied English in college, and I really wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a poet. And I went to my poetry professor, and I was kind of like, how when you're about to graduate from college, you're sort of looking for, that big piece of advice that's going to set you on your path. And I went to her hoping she would say, Ben, go be a poet, pull like a Jack Kerouac, just pack your car and go, something like that. What she gave me instead was this very practical piece of advice. She said, before you become a writer, why don't you try being a copywriter? Why don't you get a real job, pay off if you've got any loans, pay off your loans, pay your rent, and see if you really love this word thing enough to make it your life. So that's how I started. I applied to a bunch of jobs. I didn't get a whole bunch of interviews initially. And then I got this one job at a big agency in New York City working as a copywriter. And it was just a wild experience. And so that became the basis for this novel, really.
What was the agency that you worked for? What was the first agency you connected with?
I worked for a few different agencies, but the biggest one that I worked for in the beginning was Interbrand, which was at the time, and I think it still is, the largest branding agency in the world. So it's similar to an advertising agency, but their specialty is not making commercials. It's more about taglines and logos and brand strategy, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so explain, because I know a lot of people have heard the term copywriter, but explain, because there's so many different types of copywriting. Explain what your first job was as a copywriter, what that entailed.
Yeah, and it's funny because on some level, Mad Men was the best explanation, because when I got the job in 2007, Mad Men hadn't come out yet. And my friends would say, what is this job that you've got? It doesn't make any sense. A branding agency, a copywriter, what do these things mean? And then Don Draper comes along and it's like, oh, now I kind of get it. You come up with slogans, you come up with taglines, that was part of what I did. I also had more boring stuff like label copy. You pick up a bottle of Snapple or something, and there's some language on the side of it about the company and what they stand for. That's written by someone like me. That's not written by the founder of Snapple usually.
Yeah, and usually everything you see, whether it's TV, whether it's magazine, whatever, we take it for granted that someone actually had to sit down and write that stuff.
Yeah.
And that was
I mean, not just me, and maybe there's AI doing it now. Who knows? But a lot of it, is written by young copywriters who are cheap and can just churn this stuff pretty quickly.
Well, I love how the book opens. You talk about Seth Taranov, and it opens with this beautiful image of this, this burly guy that's out there chopping down trees and providing for his family, brings it home, sits down, and then your tagline comes in.
Yep. Yeah. It's something, right? My main, for folks who haven't read the book yet, my main character, he's like a one-hit wonder. He's got this one tagline that goes viral. And it's a tagline for a adult men's diaper campaign, sort of like a Depends, but even less well-known Depends, like an unknown brand. And it's everyday breed for the everyday hero. That's his tagline. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the ad is not, it's about a big sort of like, husky, hands rugged, older guy who just happens to be in need of this product. But that's always how it is. It's like, the Viagra is never for the not sexy guy. It's for the sexy guy. You know what I mean?
Right. So it's for a guy that's sitting in a tub on top of a mountain.
Exactly. So I had fun with that, because my character, this is for him. It's like he's at the mountaintop. But as the reader, I think we're immediately like, hey, wait a minute. Is this guy full of shit? Like, is this really, is he as big a superstar as he thinks he is?
Yeah, and he peaked early. Did you have that kind of success early on?
I did not. People have asked me this. I mean, Seth is not very good at his job, but I feel like he's probably better than I was because I don't have a single product or a tagline that I can point to. The probably the most famous thing that I worked on was and I didn't name this myself, but I was on the team that named it. You know, Microsoft's Bing, like the search engine that was supposed to rival Google. So my team came up with the name Bing, and our slogan was Bing, the sound found. And I always thought that was pretty clever.
Very cool. That was your team?
Yeah, we did that. Microsoft was one of our clients. Yeah.
Very cool. Are there other things that you came up with that you can hang your hat on?
There were, but the biggest thing is that what was surprising to me was how few of the things that I named and gave taglines to ever saw the light of day. Because so many companies would hire us we would spend a whole bunch of money creating a logo. We'd spend a bunch of money creating a name. We would copyright it. And then at the 11th hour, oh, they killed the product launch. Happened all the time.
Yeah.
And, or the other thing would happen was they would pay an outside agency to create this brand for something. And then the new CEO would come in and he would want to name it, after his daughter or like something, you know what I mean? Or his dog didn't like the color red. He liked the color blue. So now it's going to be a blue logo.
That happens more than not, probably.
It happens a ton. And in my experience, branding and advertising, everyone talks about how scientific it is and return on investment and data driven and focus groups. And it is that to an extent. But at the end of the day, if the CEO, has a daughter who likes a particular color, that's going to influence it probably more than any group.
Right. I was showing this to my family and they thought it should be green.
Exactly. I can't tell you how many times that blew up someone's weekend because, my wife is thinking, we're not so sure about that. It's like, okay, well, out the door.
And how was it working? Because the creative directors of ad agencies, like a Don Draper,
yeah,
such a mystique about them, and they're like revered by everybody in the office. Did you experience that where you were working?
Oh, sure. And that's part of why I wanted to write the book was because, these guys, and not just guys, obviously, men and women, but they will walk around sort of like they're golden gods, because every agency, the creatives who work in an agency are just one part of it. But if you ask the creatives, they are the heart of it. They are the ideas, the imagination. And so there's this incredible swagger. And on some level, it's like the more of a bad you are, the more difficult you are to work with. If you have your headphones all the time and you wear sloppy t-shirts to meet it, it's like you create a kind of mystique about yourself. And it was interesting because I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a creative writer. And it's interesting is in branding and advertising, you see that certain behaviors have kind of been mimicked from the art world. Like you think about a writer like Faulkner or Hemingway, who like drank himself to death. And some of that in like a Don Draper is typified. It's like, well, I guess to be a brilliant genius, you have to kind of have a certain self-destructive air. Like you have to kind of carry yourself with a certain, I don't know, just like nonchalance about life and to some extent about other people. So the creative directors, they were not easy to work with. And the ones who were not easy to work with, I think on some level, like they built up their own reputation on being difficult.
Right. And as a copywriter, as a designer, all you're doing is hoping for their approval, right? You're bringing in the ideas and it's like you're just waiting, like, what's he going to say? What's he going to think?
Yep.
And it's, you can get shut down just like that.
Oh yeah. It's brutal, actually. And
it's hard to separate. It's not, being an actor, it's, you think you have this perfect scene and you go in for an audition and you think you nailed it and then nothing. Or, you're doing a scene and you think it's just, you want that positive feedback. And when you either get no feedback or negative feedback, it's just, oh, I stink. Why am I in this business?
Yep. Yeah, yeah. Tell me about it. And sometimes the creative director actually likes it, but then you show it to the client and the client hates it. So it's like it can often feel like, it's just one gate after another.
So at the client meetings, because again, I'm basing it all on Mad Men. When
Yeah.
they have the client meetings and the creatives are in there, are the copywriters and designers in there as well, or are you just giving all of that presentation material to the directors and then they're selling it to the client?
It's a great question. It depends. I mean, that is kind of how a young copywriter or a young design, and if anyone is trying to break in the industry, it's not that I know everything about it. I don't, but I did work in it for a bit. That's the way to move up. You go from being the person who does the work to the person who presents the work. And so if a creative director is trying to trust you and thinks, oh, this person is client facing ready, I think this person could do a job with the presentation, then you kind of hand the mic over to them. Because the client does like to hear from the person who actually does the work, because the client's not stupid. They know that if you're the creative director and I'm the guy who's the writer, you may be presenting it, but you're sort of a middleman. Like they want to talk to me because I'm the guy who actually does the work. On the other hand, if I'm just going to, stammer and stutter the whole time, it's not going to go well. So that's kind of like your upward mobility path, is being the young designer, the young writer who also gets to present meeting rather than just sort of sitting there, silent.
Well, it certainly didn't go well for Seth.
No, no, it didn't go.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about Seth's journey, and were there things that you discovered in the writing about Seth, as you were writing it, because you're exploring as well. I mean, obviously you didn't necessarily live through this, so you're
No.
kind of exploring different avenues, and I'm going to go down this direction or I'm going to go down that rabbit hole. Were there aha moments while you were writing it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, the book is a novel. It's a work of fiction. So it's not my life, and Seth and I are not the same person. Having said that, I did draw on life experiences, right? And I certain things I made up, other things I pulled in. I thought it would be interesting to see what happens to a character who lives and breathes this job and then has it take away. So I started working the agency in 2007. That was around when Mad Men came out. Then the year 2008, as you know, was the Great Recession. And like a lot of industries, agencies got killed. That's one of the first budgets that gets crushed. If you're a company, it's like, well, what's easy to cut back immediately? Oh, branding and advertising. So we were losing clients left and right. I was, basically too cheap to fire because I was paid like the minimum, but a lot of my colleagues were getting axed all the time. And I was 21, 22 years old, sitting next to someone who was like in his 50s with two kids, and suddenly he's just not there on Monday. So it was a brutal environment, and it made an impact on me. And I started to think about, what would it be for someone to lose this job, not only who depended on it to pay rent and to buy groceries, but also who just, this branding job was their whole brand. They just lived and breathed it to such an extent that to lose the job would kind of totally destabilize their sense of self. And so I thought, well, maybe, that's a character like Seth, who has one tagline that he hangs his hat on. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's where he derives all of his self-esteem. And then when the job gets taken away from him, we watch him just spiral and struggle and sort of flail, in a way that could be both comedic, but also kind of tragic. So that was like the genesis of the book.
Yeah, it's very much like child actors. They reach this fame so young, and it just blows up so quickly, and they spend the rest of their life trying to chase that again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they get involved in sex and drugs and all that kind of stuff. And it must have was there any were there cathartic moments where it's as you're because it's to me it's difficult to write fiction because you have to come up with everything.
Yeah.
So you're kind of chasing ideas, and it's a lot of what ifs. Like, well, what if this happened, and what if that happened? What if Seth went down this path instead of that one? Were there cathartic moments for you in the writing?
Oh yeah, it was very cathartic. And I think the hard thing about writing fiction, you're right, is like the what if, because you got to make it up. On the other hand, that's the liberating thing. You can kind of like there's things I want to change about the world right now outside my window, but I can't change those things because the world is too big and I'm too small. But with fiction, you can kind of mold the clay, and sometimes you have your main character, he comes to a fork in the road and he takes the left path, and then you write a few paragraphs in and you say, you know what, go back, let me delete this, let me take the right path. And that's fun. That's when your character starts to feel alive, is when you kind of like a rough outline for the book, but then the character moves in directions you don't expect. There were a whole lot of things in this book that I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting in the second half of the book, his relationship to Judaism becomes much more intense. I wasn't expecting that when I started writing the book.
Right. You didn't have a through line. You didn't know the ending.
No, I didn't know. And I some writers do write with an ending in mind, and others kind of just it's like the writer E.L. Doctorow, the author of Ragtime, says that one way to write is like driving at night only by the light of your own headlights. And eventually you'll get somewhere, kind of just like only illuminate like a couple feet ahead of you. And that's sort of how far you look. You purposely don't try to envision the end, because if you do, it would ruin something.
It ruins what you discover during the journey.
Yeah, I think so. You made the comparison to acting. I think, I'm not an actor, but I have a tremendous respect for actors. And one of the things that I think is interesting is like, you have an idea for how a scene is going to go, but it's a scene with another character. If you go into that scene only focusing on what you're doing and not at all responding and reacting in time to what the other actor is doing, I don't know this, but my suspicion is it's going to feel a little stiff, because you want the two people to be in conversation. You move forward, so I move back. It's like it's got to be an interplay. It's like going into a basketball game where you have your strategy, and then you start playing the other team. They do something different, but you don't even change. You don't respond to them.
You stick to your own plan.
Exactly. Right. Rather than, being alive and modifying in real time.
Yeah. And that's why, so many times you see movies with the same actors, like, oh yeah, they did this together. And they did that. Or a director that loves to work with, like Scorsese, he loves working with De Niro and DiCaprio. And, so because they get it and they do exactly that. Words on a page, when they lift it off, it's one thing, like you said, it's one thing when you're doing a scene and you're memorizing the lines and you're going through it. But then when you're actively, interacting with your scene partner,
mm-hmm.
and that is the magic. I mean, as an actor, that is magic. When all of a sudden you come out of that scene, it's like, wow, that I had no idea it was going to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of it's like improvisation when you're a writer. I mean, you're improvising a lot of the dialogue, and you just don't know where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm. Which is the fun. I've always loved improv more than I've loved sketch comedy and just because improv to me, like, when a lot of times improv is bad, but when improv is good, it's just so it's like you're just seeing someone think, right in front of you, and it's cool. So that's what I love about writing. To me, there's some novelists, as I said, who map out every single chapter, and God bless them. That's a different skill, but it's not my skill. I like it like jazz. I like to put words on the page and see how the words sound and then respond to that.
Is this how you teach because you're teaching now, right? You were at Rutgers for a period of time, mm-hmm. and now you're up at Sarah Lawrence.
Yeah. I taught at Rutgers for 7 years. I teach I try to honor different styles. And I think that, there are pros and cons to every style. Like however any artist or actor or writer makes their magic, I'm all for it. But I do try to teach my students that you have to listen to the words on the page, not just the voice in your head. A lot of times I meet with students, they say, I've got this big idea for a poem, or I've got this big idea for a novel. And it's not that the ideas are bad necessarily, but I want to see it. I don't know if it works or not, because you could take, you could take The Catcher in the Rye, right? There's no great idea, in my opinion, in that book. It's just that Salinger wrote it and it worked. But if you were going to pitch me that idea in office hours, I'm not sure I would necessarily be excited about it. It's a,
how would you even pitch it?
right, exactly. And there's a lot of movies that way too, where there's no brilliant idea. It's just that something works. It either works or it doesn't work.
Well, and speaking, are you still writing poetry?
I am, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. You have an anthology of poems that you put together in a book.
Yes.
And that was your first release, right?
Yeah, that was my first book in 2018.
That's exciting. And so are you working on you putting together poems for a new book?
Yeah, I mean, I think, knock on wood, this will be my life is writing in multiple genres, writing some poems, writing some fiction. I've started another novel, but it's still early, and got to see what happens with it.
So the collection of poetry is called For the Love of Endings.
Yes.
And where's that derived from? Where'd you come up with that?
It's a good question. The most basic answer is that I love endings. To me, the way a poem ends, or even the way a novel ends, kind of is the whole thing, is the art form, but especially a poem, because a poem is such a distilled, short experience. So, you think about like the last line, the last two lines of a poem, where are you going to leave the reader? Are you going to throw them out of the car mid-drive, or are you going to sort of like situate them nicely and neatly on the curb and sort of make sure, like, what is the landing or the dismount going to look like? I often love poems that have what's called a volta, which is just the Italian word for like a turn or a surprise, like something that sort of, it feels sudden. You couldn't expect it. Not like a gotcha moment, but a revelation, So I just think endings, whether it's the ending of a relation, there are poems in that book about a relationship that I had that broke up. There are poems in that book about my concern with respect to what we're doing to the planet. So endings in different forms,
Well, it's For the Love of Endings, is the book on with an anthology of poetry. And then, of course, The Men Can't Be Saved. This is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any bookstores. And listen, it is a great read, and it's great. It's a great holiday gift, right? Holiday's coming up, and we are planning. Stay tuned, because we are going to plan a book signing here in northern New Jersey, most likely in Bergen County. So you'll get a chance to meet Ben, and you'll get a chance to have it signed and personalized for that special someone in your life, especially who, thinks that, their job is their whole life.
Yeah. For that special man in your life who can't be saved. It's the perfect,
well, that's so many of us out there.
Exactly.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. I wish you a lot of success with the book, with your class. I hope that I could tell that you're an inspiration to them. I'm sure.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I've loved you. It's been great.
Well, I mean, you're teaching creative writing, right?
I am.
And you published not only a book of poetry, but you published your first novel. So, there's always that expression, those who can't do, teach. But you're doing both.
Well, thank you. I'm trying my best.
I wish you much success. And again, everybody stay tuned, because we are going to set up a book signing, and you'll be able to meet Ben in person. So, Ben, thank you again for coming.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you get your books, look up Ben Purkert's new book, The Men Can't Be Saved. All right. Be well, everybody.